Tensions continue to rise across Europe. Today, Russian forces seize Europe's largest nuclear power plant. The world has condemned it, while some leaders say that Russia has endangered an entire continent. Sanctions continue to be imposed by the West, especially the United States. So what will be the cost of this war for the world? Welcome to WION World is One. My name is Priyanka Sharma, and this is our special weekly broadcast of the WION-VOA CO-Production. Let's get started. In his first State of the Union address, US President Joe Biden touted his success in uniting much of the world against Russian President Vladimir Putin's invasion of Ukraine. Biden said that Kyiv is on the front line of the global battle between democracies and autocracies, and that democracy will prevail. VOA senior diplomatic correspondent Saine reports more. Take a look.
With Russian President Vladimir Putin ratcheting up attacks on Ukrainian cities such as Kharkiv and Kyiv, U.S. President Joe Biden stood in the House chamber and told Americans the free world is united against Putin's aggression.
The free world is holding him accountable, along with 27 members of the European Union, including France, Germany, Italy, as well as countries like the United Kingdom, Canada, Japan, Korea, Australia, New Zealand, and many others, even Switzerland, are inflicting pain on Russia and supporting the people of Ukraine. Putin is now isolated from the world more than he has ever been.
Biden said Putin badly miscalculated when he launched a full-scale invasion of his neighbor.
He thought he could divide us at home, in this chamber, in this nation. He thought he could divide us in Europe as well. But Putin was wrong. We are ready. We are united, and that's what we did.
Biden said it will take time, but the United States and its NATO allies will remain united, and freedom will prevail over tyranny. Biden did not discuss the chaotic departure from Afghanistan last August. But in the Republican response to Biden's address, Governor Kim Reynolds of Iowa blasted the president for what she called his failure there.
The disastrous Afghanistan withdrawal did more than cost American lives. It betrayed our allies and emboldened our enemies.
Experts said in light of the current crisis, it makes sense that Biden devoted his foreign policy part of the speech to Ukraine, even though much there remains uncertain.
So now it's a moment where I think Biden thus far has proved a lot of his experience and value, but it all depends on how things play out in Ukraine.
Another expert told VOA the strong, positive, bipartisan response Biden received on his Ukraine remarks will be noticed in Moscow.
Foreign policy-wise, it's just a very important signal. Putin will be looking for any sign of division or vulnerability in American politics, and I think everybody in the room, not just Biden, but everybody in the room knew that this was not the moment to send that signal.
President Biden again made clear the United States will not send troops into Ukraine, but vowed that he and the other members of the NATO alliance will defend NATO territory. Saine, VOA News.
For more insights, joining us live now is Voice of America correspondent Jessica Stone from Washington. Jessica, thanks so much for joining us on WION at this hour. Now, we have seen remarkable unity among democracies against Russia's invasion of Ukraine. What are you learning about Washington's request, particularly for New Delhi, in this respect?
Well, as you know, on Thursday, President Biden held a quad virtual call with the leaders of Australia and Japan, as well as Prime Minister Modi, in which they discussed the situation in Ukraine on two main fronts. They came up with an idea to give humanitarian assistance to Ukraine and to work on disaster relief mechanism that would be administered by the Quad. And according to a statement by the Prime Minister's office, he also called for dialogue and diplomacy. But there is a bit of a rub here in the approach between New Delhi and Washington, and that is this. Even before the Indian abstention at the United Nations of the decision to have a vote on Russian invasion of Ukraine, there was this difference in policy. We've seen Russia we've seen President Biden, I should say, take steps already to pressure Prime Minister Modi to penalize Russia more for the invasion, and that could take steps in the following ways. He's asking India to join the international economic sanctions, and they continue to be ratcheted up, as we saw there was another announcement yesterday. But also, he could ask India to back away from some of the military agreements that it has with Moscow. Now, for its part, India has been consistent. It says that it is expressing its displeasure with Moscow behind the scenes, essentially privately rather than publicly. In fact, a foreign ministry spokesperson told reporters earlier that there was a direct communication between India and President Putin expressing New Delhi's critical stance against what's going on there.
Right, Jessica, on the same day that President Biden delivered that address, he also sent a delegation of former senior officials to Taiwan to meet with President Saine. How is that playing out in Asia?
Well, it's really interesting, right, because it was timed perfectly for a very robust speech here in Washington about what happens when democracies are threatened by autocracies. And we had Admiral James Mullen leading that Washington delegation sent from the White House, telling President Tsai Ing-wen, quote, we will continue to oppose any unilateral changes to the status quo and continue to support a peaceful resolution of cross-strait issues, consistent with the wishes and best interests, he added, of the people of Taiwan. Now, President Tsai, for her part, has taken this to mean that there is a rock-solid alliance between Washington and Taipei. She also talked about the implications for global and regional security. But, of course, China's feathers were very much ruffled. China's foreign ministry saying that they want Washington to abide by the one China policy or risk undermining U.S.-China relations. In addition, we also expect to see an increased role for Jakarta when it comes to standing up to China in the region and this sort of existential battle between autocracies and democracies, both because it has had the appetite to do that with respect to the South China Sea in particular, but also because it is now going to be the summit chair for the G20 in the context of leading that group globally. We expect to see Jakarta potentially have more to say about what's going on in the South China Sea and in the region.
Absolutely. Jessica Stone, thank you so much for all those insights. Stay with us on this broadcast. We'll come back to you for more inputs. Now, Western nations are continuing to pay Russia hundreds of millions of dollars every day for gas and oil imports, despite the tough sanctions imposed on the country's banking and aviation sectors following its invasion of Ukraine. With around 40% of Europe's energy needs imported from Russia, leaders are scrambling to find alternatives, as Henry Ridgwell reports from Berlin.
Russia's major banks have been sanctioned, its oligarchs targeted with asset freezes and travel bans. Russian planes have been banned from Europe's skies. But Russian gas and oil continues to flow into Europe uninterrupted, and Europe is paying hundreds of millions of dollars for it every day. EU ministers met in Brussels Monday to discuss how to break that dependency.
But every day we spend €350 million, which we give to the Russian system, to be able for them to invest in arms, which are dropping on the city of Kyiv and elsewhere today. So yes, for climate reasons and for the security of our people, we need to rid ourselves of that dependency on fossil fuels.
But Russia supplies around a third of Europe's gas, and the latest figures show imports have actually increased since its invasion of Ukraine. The soaring price makes the trade even more profitable.
I think that the West is going to try to continue to hold back on sanctioning the oil and gas sector.
Germany is among the EU states most dependent on Russian energy. It has already announced the cancellation of the $11 billion Nord Stream 2 gas pipeline from Russia.
We have to think about the future. Germany will need more gas because domestic production is declining. We also need more gas-fired power plants, and we will also use more gas in the industrial sector in order to achieve the climate targets. And we have to answer the question, where will gas come from in the future?
Germany announced plans to build 2 liquefied natural gas, or LNG, terminals to diversify supply. Europe's LNG imports hit a record high in January, with nearly half coming from the United States. Germany has pledged to switch off its nuclear power stations by the end of this year and all coal-fired plants by 2030. The government said those decisions could be reversed following Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The continent must speed up the change to renewable energy, says former Environment and Energy Secretary Rainer Barker.
There should be a very clear message to Russia now. We don't want your gas and we don't want your oil in the future. It's going to be painful because prices are probably going to be higher, but the only way to free ourselves from this dependency from fossil fuels is to put efficiency and renewables instead of the fossil energies.
Meanwhile, European energy giants, including Royal Dutch Shell and British Petroleum, have announced they are offloading their stakes in Russian oil firms worth billions of dollars. Henry Ridgwell for VOA News, Berlin.
We're again being joined by Voice of America's correspondent Jessica Stone from Washington. Jessica, thanks for staying on. So what is the U.S. in particular doing with respect to global oil supplies, particularly geared towards easing the burden on Europe right now?
Well, Washington is getting a lot of pressure, both domestically and internationally, to level sanctions specifically against Russian oil. But just yesterday, White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki said the U.S. will not do that because it will essentially result in higher prices for petroleum products, not only across the world, but in the pockets of everyday Americans. And President Biden announced that strategic reserve release of 60 million barrels a day of oil that is coordinated globally. But essentially, that is just a very minuscule amount. It's already priced in. I hear from oil traders, and I also understand from an oil trader that I spoke to that refiners are actually electively not taking Russian oil anyway. So even without sanctions against refiners or purchasers of Russian oil, there's already a de facto system in place in which refiners are not taking the oil. And that is essentially going to create higher prices across the board for all of us for oil prices. Now, as you know, India had agreed to purchase some oil from Russia late last year. We also expect that Indian refiners are going to look for more oil supply in the Middle East. We're hearing reports already of a major Indian refiner looking for that in Qatar, and that could offset what's going on with respect to Russian oil prices. But again, Washington does not anticipate leveling sanctions against the oil sector in Russia for the reasons I've discussed.
Right, absolutely. Just to follow up to that, India's dependence on Russia's oil is minuscule when compared to that of Europe. But there are clearly signs of impact on India from this new round of U.S. sanctions on Russia, which was announced on Tuesday. What can you tell us about that?
Well, actually, these are quite significant because this military, Russian military equipment sanctions that the U.S. has leveled basically makes it hard for any country around the world to purchase Russian military equipment. And a U.S. diplomat told Congress just this week that the White House is looking at actually whether to sanction India for its purchases of Russian military equipment. That's specifically that S-400 missile defense system. I think we have pictures of that to show you now. And as you've reported, New Delhi had hoped to actually have that all set up by next year, the first installment essentially just by April, so next month, and that's designed, of course, to ward off China. But the White House has a law here. It does have a tool in its toolbox that it can use. It's called Countering American Adversaries Through Sanctions Act, and this is the acronym is CATS. This would allow Washington to sanction India for its defense deals with Russia. But there's also another caveat to that law. Washington can choose not to do so. There is a waiver authority that Washington can exercise. They have done that in the past with NATO ally Turkey, and they could well do it again for what's going on with India and its agreements currently with Russian military providers.
Right. Jessica Stone, thank you so much for all those insights, and thanks for joining us on WION on this special broadcast.
You bet.